吃饭了。
你吃饭没有？
吃饭了没有？
恰个饭单吗？
那去呗噻。
吃了吗？
There are so many misconceptions about learning Chinese. This language seems most mystical and obscure. In this video, I'm gonna try and dispel at least some of those myths so that if you haven't started your Chinese journey, you will be more willing to try it. And if you have already started, the process will seem less complex. Okay, let's start. Myth number 1. You need an absolute ear for music to manage Chinese tones. This is probably the most deeply seated misconception, partly because tonal languages are very rare. Only a handful of the world's languages have tones, and also partly because tones are indeed hard to master for speakers of non-tonal languages, so sometimes it feels like you need some kind of inborn talent to get the tones right. Sometimes you can hear that only musically gifted people can differentiate tones and can get them right. Okay, this is a total myth, and it should never ever discourage you from practicing tones or from learning Chinese. From my personal experience, I can say that those learners who have some musical aptitude, they do indeed find tones not that difficult, but at the same time I know tons of people who have nothing to do with music. They hate karaoke, they have never touched a musical instrument, and yet somehow their tones are perfect. In fact, an ear for music is an advantage to manage Chinese tones, but it is not a necessary condition. Just the same way that an outstanding memory helps you remember words better, but it doesn't mean that people with average memory cannot have rich vocabulary. It's kind of the same thing with any other advantage that we have. No two people have exactly the same playing field due to differences in personal characteristics, determination, time available, money, and so on. It's just a fact of life, and it's true for languages just as well as for anything else. To get your tones right, you need only two things. First, you need to understand the mechanics behind the tones, how the tones are produced, how the pitch changes at different points as you pronounce the syllable, and how they combine in real speech. And number two, you need practice. You need to practice to distinguish tones in the speech of other people, and you need to be able to train your ear to distinguish the tones as you speak. And there is absolutely no obstacle why any of us cannot do either of those things. So do not believe anybody who's telling you that you can't learn Chinese tones if you don't sing. Well, after all, millions of Chinese can't sing and they still have tones. Myth number 2 is that you can't learn Chinese well outside of China. This misconception probably stems from the fact that many Chinese learners actually went to China at some point. Maybe they studied in China or they did some exchange program. There are lots of scholarships for that. And maybe it was true some time ago when there were no good resources available to Chinese learners, no good books, no platforms to practice with the natives, and no authentic Chinese content. This is no longer the case. We have every opportunity, and we should use every opportunity, to immerse ourselves into Chinese culture and the language environment without actually going to China. You can get Chinese social media apps, you can find a native on italki, you can watch Chinese TV shows, and so on. So whenever anybody is telling you that you can't learn Chinese well outside of China, it means they don't want to. It's another thing that, of course, some cultural peculiarities can be picked up only in China, and of course it is easier to learn Chinese there in the environment, but that's a really different question. There is no way why you can't learn to read, write, speak well outside of China, and all those cultural things, cultural peculiarities, they become important on a more advanced level, on intermediate level. As you begin, you can absolutely do without them and without going to China for study. Myth number 3, you need outstanding memory to remember Chinese characters. Remember the first myth about an ear for music and Chinese tones? Well, this is similar. A good memory is an advantage when you learn Chinese characters, just like in any other subject or any other job, but it is not an absolute necessity. Think about acting. I honestly cannot imagine how those people learn all those lines, and obviously a good memory is necessary for an actor, but nobody seriously thinks that a good memory automatically makes you a good actor. So yes, learning Chinese is easier with good memory, obviously, but that's just it, nothing more, nothing less. And apart from that, there are lots of techniques that help you train your memory. And also, I think that with Chinese characters, the more you learn, the easier it becomes, because each new character that you meet as you study is just a combination of the elements that you already know. I think we should be more concerned about how we read those characters, how to remember the reading, the pronunciation of those characters, because you don't know how to read the character unless you learn it. But learning characters per se is not really that difficult. It also helps to group components. You can work out a system to classify them that works specifically for you, that helps you remember new characters. For example, I'm reading a book and I come across a new character, and I try to find at least several, 3-5 characters that have the same component in the same place. So the knowledge of characters grows exponentially as you progress. At the very beginning, it is hard because every new character is new, but then as you reach intermediate, even pre-intermediate level, and you get a critical mass of those components, it becomes much easier. Well, there are other aspects that may seem more difficult, but learning characters is definitely not one of them. Myth number 4: Chinese has no grammar, or Chinese has very easy grammar. Chinese grammar may seem easy from the point of view of European languages, of classical grammar as we know it, Latin or Greek. There are no cases, no conjugations, words do not change their endings, there are no such nightmares as past perfect or future perfect. But Chinese does have grammar, and it's actually not that easy. Chinese grammar is all about syntax, it's all about word order. And as you try to translate a longer sentence, you understand that those big grammar books were not written for nothing. And then you realize that you have to overhaul your entire understanding of how a language works. And this is one of the reasons I love Chinese so much. It teases my brain and it makes it work in the ways it never worked before. Myth number 5: it's useless to learn Chinese because of so many different dialects, and many other misconceptions like this. Why learn even if Chinese don't understand each other? Or how can I learn if nobody really speaks standard Chinese? Well, first of all, China is doing a lot to standardize its national language and obligates everybody, even minorities, to speak Putonghua. So the number of people who cannot speak standard Chinese is minimal, and it is decreasing. Nowadays, every young person can speak standard Chinese with more or less accent. And all those fears about not understanding like completely are very much exaggerated. Yes, maybe there are 70-year-olds in a remote village who cannot speak Putonghua, but I don't really think they are your primary audience for practicing Chinese. And dialects are not really that big of an issue in those huge melting pot cities, Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, Hangzhou, Nanjing, where foreigners mostly live. In every such big city, there are people from everywhere, and they have to communicate somehow, and they do it successfully, so they do it via 普通话. So why you cannot be able to do that? Also, everybody knows that you're a foreigner, that you learn standard language, so they will be trying to speak standard language with you to the best of their ability. If you go to that part of China where people traditionally speak very, very differently from standard Chinese, for example, like in Sichuan or in Guangzhou, you will just have to spend some time adapting to understand what exactly they pronounce differently. Dialects cannot and should not be a deterring factor when you learn. In fact, don't even worry about it until you actually plan to go to Guangzhou or to Chengdu. And even then, just spend some time, take some classes with a native teacher from that region, and you will be able to pick up what they pronounce differently. Dialect variations are all about pronunciation and a little bit of vocabulary, but nothing about grammar. So it's merely just understanding when they pronounce s instead of sh and l instead of n. Don't think about it as an obstacle. Think about it as an opportunity to learn another dialect, and think about how cool it will be and how many compliments you will get when you address people in their dialect, and how many discounts you're gonna get from local vendors when you talk in their dialect with them. So these were the major myths and misconceptions about learning Chinese. If you hear some other ideas that you felt were false or completely inaccurate, I would love to hear about them. Okay, thanks for watching. 谢谢大家耐心观看，下次再见，拜拜。